still don't like sitting with my back to a window. My husband thinks it's just one of those habits people pick up as they get older. I let him think that. The truth is, it started in Iraq. I live outside Denver now. I work in project management for a construction company. Most days are predictable. And after everything that happened overseas, that's exactly how I like them. But in 2004, I was 26 years old and working for KBR at K2 Airfield outside Baiji, Iraq. There was one abandoned house near the perimeter fence that I couldn't stop watching. The strange part is, it seemed to be watching back. K2 was an old Iraqi Air Force base by the time I arrived. It was packed with soldiers, contractors, vehicles, and temporary housing units. It felt less like a military installation and more like a rough version of a small city. My container unit sat near the eastern perimeter. Beyond the fence was a row of abandoned residential buildings that had once housed Iraqi Air Force families. Everyone called it the ghost town. The families had left before the invasion. Nobody seemed completely sure why. What everyone agreed on was that they left in a hurry. People who had been inside the houses talked about dishes still sitting in kitchens, clothes hanging in closets, and toys left on bedroom floors. Everything was coated in dust. Nothing looked packed, just abandoned. There were dozens of houses out there, but everyone seemed to notice the same one. A 2-story house closest to the fence. The first thing that bothered me wasn't the building itself. It was the Iraqi workers. Every day, local laborers came onto the base to help with maintenance and support work. If they walked near the eastern perimeter, they never looked toward that house, not once. I remember stopping one afternoon and looking directly at it. 3 workers walking nearby immediately turned their attention somewhere else. One of them actually changed direction. When I asked a supervisor about it, he laughed and said they were probably being superstitious. That answer should have satisfied me. It didn't. Few weeks later, I started hearing footsteps on the roof of my container unit. Slow footsteps, walking from one end to the other, then back again. At first, I assumed it was an animal. The base had stray dogs. That seemed reasonable. The strange part was the timing. The footsteps always seemed to happen sometime after 1 in the morning. One night, I checked my watch. 1:18 a.m. The next time it happened, I checked again. 1:17. Close enough to make me notice. I still told myself it was an animal. Then one night, my roommate sat upright in her bunk. You hear that? I was already awake. The footsteps crossed the roof, stopped, then came back the other way. Neither of us got out of bed. Neither of us talked about it afterward. The next morning, It was like the conversation never happened. That was pretty common over there. People ignored things they couldn't explain. About a month into my deployment, I noticed something different about the house. The front window was open. I remember looking at it during a perimeter inspection because I was almost certain it had been closed before. I walked past again a few days later. The window was shut. A week later, it was open again. I mentioned it to my roommate. She shrugged. Neither of us wanted to be the person making a big deal out of an abandoned building. A few days later, we were walking back from chow when she stopped suddenly. Was that chair always there? I looked through the window. There was a wooden chair inside the room. I honestly couldn't remember seeing it before. That should have been the end of it. Instead, I started paying attention. Every time I passed the eastern fence, I looked for the chair. Sometimes it sat near the window. Other times, it seemed farther back in the room. Once it appeared angled toward the wall. Another time, it looked like it was facing the doorway. The changes were subtle, small enough that I kept questioning my own memory. But they were enough to bother me. The footsteps continued. Always late at night, always the same slow pace. One night, I decided to count. 18 steps, pause, then 18 steps back. The next night, I counted again. Same number. Exactly the same. After that, I couldn't stop listening for them. Around 6 weeks into my rotation, I was inspecting fencing near the eastern perimeter when I noticed the window was open again. I walked closer. That's when I saw the handprint. It was pressed into the dust on the windowsill, clear enough to make out individual fingers, fresh enough that the edges weren't blurred. The hand was facing inward, like someone had climbed through the window from outside. I stood there looking at it for longer than I'd like to admit. The rational explanation was obvious. An abandoned building in a war zone could attract anybody. Soldiers, contractors, locals, insurgents. The handprint wasn't impossible, but it bothered me anyway. I didn't report it. I didn't tell anyone. The next morning, I went back. The handprint was gone, not smeared or partially erased. Gone. The dust looked untouched. A few days later, my roommate noticed the chair again. This time, she stopped walking. I know that thing moved. That was the first time someone else said it out loud. After that, I became obsessed. Every trip near the fence turned into an excuse to check the house. I watched the window, looked at the chair, and listened for the footsteps. I started noticing details that probably meant nothing. Some days the room seemed darker than it should have been. Other days the chair disappeared completely. Then it would show up again. Different position, different angle, always in the same room, in the same house. Eventually, my contract ended a few days before I left Iraq. I had one final facilities inspection. Part of the route took me along the eastern perimeter. I stopped at the fence one last time. The window was open. The chair was visible. For a moment, everything looked normal. Then I realized why it felt wrong. The chair wasn't facing the room. It wasn't facing the window. It was facing the fence, facing directly toward my container unit, toward the place where I'd been sleeping for months. I stood there looking at it. Then I walked away. I never went back. Years later, while clearing out old storage boxes, I found photographs from that deployment. One of them showed the eastern perimeter. The house was visible in the background. The window was open. The chair was there, facing the fence. What bothered me wasn't the chair. It was the dust. The room was coated in it. The floor, the walls, the window frame, everything. But there wasn't a single visible footprint anywhere inside. And for some reason, that's the detail I still think about whenever I find myself checking the locks before bed. I've spent 6 years trying to convince myself that a photograph can lie. Not edited, not faked, just lie. Because if it can't, then I still don't have a good explanation for what I photographed at an ancient tomb in Saudi Arabia. And at some point, without really meaning to, I stopped opening the file after dark. I'm in Amsterdam now. I have a good life, good apartment, good friends, work I enjoy. I've been a travel journalist for over a decade, and I've spent most of that time moving through places most people only read about. Conflict zones, remote villages, countries where I didn't speak the language, and sometimes barely understood the situation. In all that time, I've never come home claiming something supernatural happened to me. This is the only story that makes me hesitate before saying that. In 2018, I was assigned to cover Al-Ula in northwestern Saudi Arabia. Most people know it now because of tourism campaigns. But when I visited, it was still relatively unfamiliar to international travelers. The main attraction was Madain Sali, a vast archaeological site filled with ancient rock-cut tombs carved directly into sandstone cliffs. My guide was a local man named Faisal. He'd spent most of his life in the region and knew the site better than anyone I met during that trip. On the drive out, he pointed toward the tombs and said something unusual. He told me many local families had avoided parts of the area for generations, not because of safety, neither because of politics. They simply didn't like being there. I asked why. He thought about it for a moment, then shrugged. Some places have histories people prefer not to discuss. A little later, I asked again. Same answer. No explanation, no story, just a polite refusal to continue the conversation. At the time, I assumed he was just tired of tourist questions. Now I'm not so sure. The next afternoon, Faisal arranged private access to photograph one of the most famous structures in the area, Qasr al-Farid, the lonely castle. Unlike most tombs, it stands completely alone in the desert. No nearby structures, no crowds, just stone and wind. We arrived late in the afternoon. The light was perfect. Faisal parked, told me I had about 20 minutes, and walked back toward the vehicle. I was alone, at least I thought I was. For the first 10 or 15 minutes, everything was normal. Then I heard a voice, just one sound, a single syllable. Close enough that I immediately turned around, expecting to see someone behind me. There was nobody there. The desert was completely open in every direction. I could see Faisal's vehicle in the distance, nothing else. I stood still, listening, nothing. Eventually, I went back to shooting. That's when I noticed the entrance. Something was standing inside it. Not movement, not reflection. A shape occupying the doorway. The entrance itself was dark, deep shadow. But whatever I was looking at seemed darker than the shadow around it. Human-sized, human-shaped, completely still. I remember looking, trying to make sense of it. My first thought was another visitor. My second was that it was impossible, because there was nowhere it could have come from without crossing open ground. Then instinct took over. I raised the camera, pressed the shutter. The photograph captured. The sound echoed off the stone, and the figure was gone. Not moving away, not stepping backward. Gone. The doorway was empty. I walked back toward the vehicle faster than I meant to. Faisal noticed. Before I said anything, he looked at me and asked, "You saw something, didn't you?" Not surprised or curious, just tired, like he already knew. I asked what he meant. He ignored the question. So I told him everything. He listened, without interrupting. When I finished, he sat for a moment, then said, "Don't put that in your article." I asked why. He said people came to see the tombs, not hear stories. Then he started driving. 10 minutes later, he spoke again. "And don't tell anyone what you saw." I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. He looked at me more seriously, then repeated it. "Don't tell anyone." Back at the hotel, I uploaded the images. At first. I wasn't even looking for it, just sorting the shoot. Then I reached the final photograph, the doorway, and I stopped. Something appears visible inside it, not clearly, not identifiable, but enough that everyone who sees it reacts immediately. Photographers, professionals, they don't agree on what it is, but they all agree on one thing: they can't explain it. 6 years have passed. I still have the photograph. I've never published it, never deleted it, but I don't think much about what I saw anymore. What stays with me is everything that happened afterward. The way Faisal knew, the way he wasn't surprised, the way he warned me not to write about it, and especially not to tell anyone. I still have the photograph. I still open it, but never after dark. I don't talk about OP Rock at the VA. I've never told my wife the real reason either. I just say Afghanistan was rough and leave it there. I'm in Fayetteville, North Carolina now. Normal job, normal life. Most days I can almost convince myself 2009 is behind me. Almost. I was one of 8 Marines sent to observation post Rock in Helmand Province during the summer of 2009. Small observation post, 8 Marines, 60 days, watch the approaches and report movement. Simple mission. The British unit we were replacing didn't act like it was simple. They were already packed when we arrived, gear loaded, no proper handoff, no walkthrough, just waiting to leave. As they climbed into their vehicles, one of them pulled me aside. He looked exhausted. The only thing he said was, "Mind the tower after dark." I asked what he meant. He didn't answer, just repeated it. Then they drove away. The first 2 nights were quiet. On the 3rd night, one of our guys came off watch looking unsettled. He told me he'd seen something outside the wire. A small figure, definitely a child, standing about 30 meters from the north wall. Not moving, not reacting, just standing there. He kept his scope on it for nearly 20 minutes. Then it was gone. I told him it was probably a local kid. He nodded. Neither of us believed it. 2 nights later, another Marine reported seeing the same thing. Same side of the outpost, same distance, same motionless figure. The strange part was he had never heard about the first sighting. Now, we had 2 independent reports describing the same thing. That got everyone's attention. After that, something changed around the post. Guys started checking sectors twice. Nobody wanted the north wall. Radio traffic got noticeably quieter after midnight. No one said they were scared, but everyone was paying closer attention. Then someone noticed a pattern. Every sighting happened in exactly the same place. Not close to the same place. The same place, 30 meters from the north wall, every single time. Different Marines, different nights, same location. One of the guys joked that maybe she had a favorite spot. Nobody laughed. By the end of the 3rd week, 5 of the 8 Marines had seen her. I hadn't. Part of me was relieved. Part of me wanted to know. I saw her on day 31. I was scanning my sector through a scope when she appeared. One moment the ground was empty. The next moment it wasn't. She stood exactly where everyone said she would, 30 meters out, perfectly still. I called 2 Marines over. All 3 of us watched. After a few minutes, one of them quietly said, "She's looking at us." I adjusted my scope. He was right. We watched her for close to 40 minutes. Then she disappeared. The report was filed. Probable local surveillance activity. That explanation looked fine on paper. Nobody at OP Rock really believed it anymore. The sightings continued, not often, not regularly. Just enough that nobody forgot. And one detail kept bothering all of us. Nobody ever saw her arrive. By day 59, our final night before rotation, that fact bothered me more than anything else. I was alone on the north wall around 3 in the morning. Same sector, same darkness, same silence. Then she appeared again. exactly where she'd always been, 30 meters from the wall, watching. I raised my scope. There she was, motionless, focused. After a while, I lowered the scope and looked directly with my own eyes. No magnification, no glass between us, just distance. She was still looking at me, not wandering, not scanning, just completely focused looking. And I remember having a realization that still bothers me 15 years later. It wasn't fear. It was the feeling that whatever I was looking at had been aware of us the entire time. Patient, observing, never approaching, never retreating, just watching. I don't know why, but I looked away first. Only for a second. When I looked back, she was gone. We rotated out the next morning. No explanation, no answers. Just another convoy leaving another hill in Afghanistan. I came home, built a life, a good one. But OP rock never really stayed behind. There were pits of bones that we all could have multiple explanations for. And there's these sightings we all couldn't understand, because what still bothers me isn't that we saw her. It's the pattern, nearly 60 days. Multiple witnesses, different shifts, same location. And eventually, I realized something. We spent 2 months watching that hill, but we were never watching her as carefully as she was watching us. And I never found out what she was waiting for. I started smoking again about 3 years after I got back from Iraq. My wife wasn't happy about it. I told her it was work stress, and she accepted that answer because it was easier than explaining what actually keeps me awake at night. I'm in Portland now, Oregon. I do security consulting, corporate clients, office buildings, parking garages, the kind of work where the biggest problem is usually a broken camera or an unlocked door. It's a good life. Most of Iraq has settled into something I can live with. This part hasn't. In 2004, I was attached to 2nd Battalion, 3rd Infantry Regiment, out of FOB Patriot in Mosul. If you know anything about Mosul during that period, you know there was always something happening. Attacks, patrols, convoy escorts, security operations. Nobody had time to sit around inventing ghost stories. That's important because I wasn't looking for anything strange. I was focused on the same thing everyone else was focused on. Getting through the deployment alive. About 2 months into the rotation, FOB Diamondback came under attack. Units from across the city were moving to support. We loaded into strikers and pushed north through Mosul after dark. At one point, our convoy passed through a district I'd never seen before. The area looked abandoned. Not damaged, abandoned. Entire streets with no lights, no people, no movement. There was an old British-era fort nearby that stood out even in the dark. I remember looking at it through the rear camera monitor inside the vehicle. Then I saw something standing in the road ahead, tall, very tall, completely motionless. My first thought was possible threat. I called it out immediately. The vehicle commander relayed it forward. I kept watching the screen. The figure didn't move, didn't react, didn't step aside. Then the lead striker drove directly through the spot where it had been standing, and afterward there was nothing there. No impact, no person running away, nothing. The commander asked me to confirm what I'd seen. I told him exactly what I just told you. Tall figure, middle of the road, then gone. Nobody else had an explanation. The convoy kept moving. So did I, at least physically. Mentally, I kept coming back to it, not because it was scary, because it didn't make sense. The height bothered me. The stillness bothered me most of all. The fact that it hadn't reacted to an armored convoy moving directly toward it bothered me. For the next few weeks I started paying attention whenever that district came up. Nobody liked going there, not Iraqi police, not local workers, not even some of the interpreters. If a route passed near that neighborhood, people suddenly had reasons to suggest alternatives. Nobody made a big speech about it. Nobody explained it. They just avoided it. One afternoon, an Iraqi police officer was helping coordinate traffic during an operation when our route planner pointed toward that district. The officer immediately suggested another route, then another, and another. Anything except that area. When someone asked why, he shrugged and changed the subject. That got my attention because it reminded me of the figure, and eventually it bothered me enough that I brought it up to Tariq. Tariq was one of our interpreters, born and raised in Mosul. Smart guy, knew the city better than anyone I ever met. One night we were cleaning gear in the motor pool, and I told him what I had seen, just the facts, the road, the district, the height, the way it disappeared. For once, Tariq didn't interrupt. He listened to the entire story. Then he asked me exactly where it happened. Not generally, exactly. I described the road and the location near the old fort. He nodded slowly. And what happened next is the part I still remember most clearly. He didn't look surprised. He looked relieved, like I just confirmed something he already suspected. Then he said one word, "Jinn." I laughed and told him I didn't believe in that kind of thing. He shrugged. Then he said something I'll never forget. "It doesn't matter," not aggressively, not trying to convince me, just matter of fact. Then he told me the district had been empty for longer than anyone could remember, not because of the current war or Saddam Hussein. Long before that, generations before that. According to him, people had avoided that area for as long as local records existed. The fort was old, the ground underneath it was older, and there were places in Iraq where people learned not to stay longer than necessary. That was his explanation. Simple as that. No speech. No folklore lesson. Just information. Then he said something that stuck with me. He said what I saw wasn't dangerous. At least not from what I had described. I asked why. He said, "The ones that stand and watch are not the kind you need to worry about." I laughed, mostly because I didn't know what else to do with that answer. Then I asked him what the dangerous ones looked like. He thought about it for a few seconds. Instead, he said, "I'll tell you another time." That was the end of the conversation. A few weeks later, he was reassigned. I never saw him again, and that's where the story should probably end. But it doesn't. Because I spent 4 more months in Mosul after that conversation. 4 more months running patrols, driving convoys, moving through neighborhoods all over the city, and I never saw another figure standing in the road, not once. For years, I took comfort in that. Then one night, years after I got home, I realized something. Tarek never told me I wouldn't see another one. He never said I'd been lucky. He never said it couldn't happen again. All he said was, the ones that stand and watch are not the kind you need to worry about. And that's the part that still bothers me, because if he was right, then what I saw that night wasn't the dangerous kind, which means there are other kinds. I've thought about that conversation a lot over the years. More than firefights, more than roadside bombs, more than most of the things I was actually trained to deal with. Because I still don't know whether Tarek was telling me a story, sharing a belief, or warning me. And I'm not sure I want to know. I only know one thing. I never saw another one standing in the road again. And somehow, that's never made me feel better.